big story that we are tracking, and that is on the e-invoicing facility that the GST department of the government of India has been pushing. And now the latest is that small businesses will be brought under GST e-invoicing, and even businesses without a GST registration number, so to speak, can avail facilities starting the 1st of October, use the e-invoicing facilities and make sure there's an electronic invoice for all of their transactions. Bear in mind, e-invoicing is meant for business-to-business transactions, and that is something that's meant to provide more formality and more organization and make sure the tax collection is right and tax paying is right. We have Mr. A.S. Bisla, Senior Advisor, Indirect Tax at CII, joining us here live on the broadcast. Mr. Bisla, thank you so much for joining us. I want to begin by asking you, talk to us per se about the efforts made towards e-invoicing and what does the latest move mean? The latest move means that small businesses will have to compulsorily get into e-invoicing starting the 1st of July.
Yes, please. So the concept of e-invoicing is, I think, excellent on the part of the government. You see, it will not only reduce the chances of evasion of taxes, but it will also be helpful for auto-population of the data to the traders' invoice.
Right. We will re-establish a connection with Mr. Bisla and get him back on the show for you. But fact of the matter is that it's a great initiative from the government as far as bringing more transparency in business transactions are concerned. The GST e-invoicing has been pushed for the last 6 months or so, and now it is now come under the ambit of all small businesses. We have Mr. Prashant Agarwal, partner, PwC India Indirect Tax, also joining us in the broadcast. Prashant Agarwal, thank you so much for being with us. Talk to us per se about e-invoicing, a measure that has been pushed by the GST department for the last 6 months, and now the latest move to bring in all small businesses under compulsory e-invoicing, and even those without a GST registration number can do e-invoicing for their online transactions.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, firstly. So this e-invoicing, just to correct you, has been as a measure introduced in India since October 2020. And we started with the largest taxpayers, and we starting from 500 crores and above of turnover. And from 1st August, it will come down to 5 crores. And you rightly said, in October, there is further measure to bring it down. As far as the measure is concerned, it is basically just to help our viewers understand, it is registering your invoice with the government through a portal which is known as Invoice Registration Portal, or IRP as they call it. The government, in order to ensure that they can scale up to handle these kind of taxpayers or these number of taxpayers, recently had 4 new IRPs introduced, in fact 5 new IRPs introduced. In terms of benefits that we see from both government and taxpayers point of view, from a government standpoint, of course, if you see even the analysis of how the return filing compliances have improved over the last 2 years, which is almost 50% increase from a 63 million returns being filed to 93 million returns being filed, and subsequently obviously the increase in the tax buoyancy that we see across, that's one part of it, which means more formalization of the economy per se, and the whole ecosystem is now trying to be more compliant from a GST standpoint. So that's the benefit that government sees out of the whole e-invoicing protocol. For the industry, as Mr. Bisla was trying to suggest, that there is an auto population of data, which means facilitating the compliance of the industry. But the biggest game changer for the industry would be once the government starts publishing this data from a supplier standpoint to its buyer in a digital format. So understand it this way, that today what happens is, if I'm a buyer of a particular goods in a B2B transaction, I actually do a AP process, which is the accounts payable process, largely manually, booking of the invoice. The moment I have this digital invoice with me, I would be able to automate the process of whole accounting or accounts payable, which in a way would be a big relief to the industry once they are able to do that. So that's a big game changer which will come in. We hope the GSTN, which is the nodal body undertaking all the administration of tax in India through technology, would enable this publishing of data, which a supplier is raising as an invoice, registering with the government portal with the buyer. And that would be a big change per se.
Right. If I were to ask you, Prashant, if I were a consumer, an average, layman on the street who's not a business owner, were to look at this piece of news and see e-invoicing as a major move, how would this eventually impact the consumer on the street?
So see, for consumer on street, what they would see is that more of formalization of economy, as I said. That's the benefit which comes in, that everyone would be more or less transacting them in the right manner. E-invoicing per se directly doesn't have an impact from an end customer standpoint unless the government starts asking the businesses to also publish these invoices which are B2C. As of now, as you rightly said, it is B2B. If it moves to B2C, that is when the end customers will get impacted. Today, B2C is largely not impacted via e-invoicing. There's a different provision which requires government to provide a dynamic QR code on the invoice, which enables the payment of the transaction by a customer. For the end customer, the incentivization which the government intends to do is certainly something different, which is Mera Bill, Mera Adhikar, which is where if the government introduces that, that would mean if I and you ask our seller to give the invoice which is GST compliant, we may have a lottery system which the government may introduce, whereby we may be incentivized for having a formal transaction with our retailers rather than doing it, let's say, on cash.
Right. I'm asking this only because I think it's a good time then to ask the question that is it time for how long before e-invoicing reaches B2C, as in business to consumer?
So see, I think B2C, whether you really need e-invoicing is also an important question to answer in our kind of a dynamics where you have significant amount of, you're talking about 140 billion people transacting in some way or the other with commercial transactions. So whether we need that kind of a requirement at this stage, I think it has to be a phase-wise approach. It would take some more time before it reaches that level. Covering all B2B transactions is extremely important because that is where the tax leakage is seen largely. From a government standpoint, even the credits, GST credits that we talk about, fake credits, fake invoicing, all of that would be taken care of as we move the whole journey through e-invoicing. B2C large, which is let's say a 2.5 lakh above transaction, is something that the government can look at from an e-invoicing standpoint. But I still think there is some distance to cover before we see all invoices across India getting covered through e-invoicing per se.
Right. More than e-invoicing, this piece of news really attracted me because of that factor that a small business without a GST registration number can now sell online and also generate e-invoicing as well. That's very important. And Prashant, isn't that, in that sense, will that not affect the consumer eventually in a very positive way? More and more small businesses will be able to sell their wares online.
Yeah, so I think let's divide this part into two. I think the first part that you said, which is enabling an unregistered dealer in our language, which is a small tax payer, to sell goods online, that definitely is a big boost to the online or to the small sellers because now their reach goes beyond their own territory to other territories per se within India. So that definitely will have a big impact for the consumer as well because now I have more to choose from. And for imagine the MSMEs, the reach that they can enable through the e-commerce players is immense. So I think that will definitely have an impact, regardless of whether it is e-invoicing requirement or not, because that I still think government will have to shell out more details as to how they would undertake the whole e-invoicing part of it. But formalizing that part and bringing them a bigger territory to deal with, really going to be a big boost to the economy as well.
A big boost to the economy. How do you see this, furthering other agendas for the country, which is greater widening the tax net and greater tax collection and greater accountability for businesses that operate in the country?
Yeah, so I think that's where e-invoicing has hit positively to the government. As I said earlier, if you see track the numbers, starting with let's say the number of taxpayers who were involved, they were 90 or let's say 90 lakhs prior to e-invoicing. They are more than 1.4 crores now. So that shows how the compliance is increasing. If you look at the number of returns which is getting filed from let's say 63, 64 million returns, they are now at 94 million returns post e-invoicing over last 2.5 years when the e-invoicing has been compliant with. If you look at the numbers of revenues, we all know how the revenue has been increasing over a period of time. Of course, economy has played a big role, but as the more number of taxpayers come into the net and more returns are getting filed, that also means the government is able to increase the amount of revenue that they're collecting as part of GST as well.
Right, and talk to us in terms of the aggregate turnovers, the applicability that you see the graphics over there. So you have 500 crores, 100 crores, 50 crores, 20 crores, 10 crores. Now this kind of slabs for e-invoicing under GST. I want your thoughts on that, Prashant.
Yeah, so this basically, as I said earlier, it was a phase-wise approach through which the government introduced e-invoicing. What you see on your screen, 500 crore was the first limit which came about, which was the largest taxpayers in India to basically comply with the e-invoicing requirement, which has been gradually reduced. So Within 3 months, the government reduced it to 100 crores, then brought it down to 50 crores, then it to 20 crores, 10 crores, 5 crores. So the idea is increase the ambit of taxpayers who have to do e-invoicing. One has to really remember this part that e-invoicing requires you technology enablement as well. So not only does it mean more people coming into formal economy, but it also requires, or let's say forces a trader or a small taxpayers to adopt technology more. And therefore, one of the things that the taxpayers will have to now be very careful about is how well are they complying with this e-invoicing, because this cannot be done manually. This is not a manual process possibility. They will have to have a, let's say, a formal ERP or a billing system, which has to then integrate with the government system to basically transmit the invoice data, which is digital, from their billing system to the government portal and receive that information back. And that, if the traders and the small taxpayers are also able to adopt to, which means that we are reaching out to the last mile taxpayers to automate their, digitalize their whole accounting and the e-invoice compliance. I think that will be a big advantage over a period of time to the traders. And I think that's adaptability is where the challenge may come across initially, as to whether these taxpayers are able to adopt to these systems and how government can enable them. I think that would be very, very important.
Right. If I were to ask you one more thing, what this does is essentially make the industry review every company has to review who their vendors are, who are the vendors supplying goods and services to them, and also to make sure that with respect to the availing of input tax credit. So because of this order, which means that from the 1st of August, all businesses have to do e-invoicing. All the big companies, who have vendors of all shapes and sizes will need to review their vendor agreements.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just vendor agreements, but the whole process as far as their ERPs or any other accounting softwares are concerned, how they are onboarding the vendor, how they are processing their invoices, whether they are compliant from all GST perspective or not, is something which the companies have been looking at. Because see, e-invoice has been there for now almost 2 years. Almost 50 crores and above vendors are already covered, 10 crores vendors are covered. So ideally, the companies should have been in this process. And now it becomes even more imminent for companies to do that, because they would only want to pay the vendor when they are compliant from an e-invoicing perspective. If they're not compliant from an e-invoicing perspective, it also means, as you rightly said, there is a risk of the companies not being allowed to avail the GST credits, which is a big hit to the bottom line itself from a business standpoint. So you're very right that the companies have to look at contracts, they have to look at their IT systems, the process controls that have to be built in to manage their vendors. So the whole vendor management system becomes extremely important. As I said, starting from the vendor onboarding to a purchase order to when the vendor invoice comes in and when you actually make the payment of those invoices to the vendor.
Right, and what does it mean for others? Who, for example, for individuals with the GST registered numbers who are buying from vendors of all shapes and sizes. So many people took to making their own business or own entrepreneurship, which got and registered their own GST numbers during the pandemic, when many of them are working out of home. What does it mean for them?
So again, depending on the class of taxpayer that we are dealing with, if he's a composition dealer, he doesn't get the credit access. So they may not get that much of an impact. But overall, everyone have to analyze their own situation, ensure that not only they are compliant from an e-invoicing standpoint, but also their ecosystem, as I explained earlier on the vendor side, which again, just to reemphasize, requires automation, adopting better technology to be able to deal with this kind of a system. See, the government has been way ahead of the curve from a technology enablement standpoint, at least under GST. It is about us as individual proprietors or partnership firms or companies who are catching up on this. And government is only going far ahead in terms of using the technology better. And hence, it's important for us to also evaluate ourselves as to whether we are up to it or not.
Right, stay with us, Prashant. We also have Mr. A.S. Bisla, Senior Advisor, Indirect Tax at CII, joining us on the broadcast live. Mr. Bisla, lovely to have you back on the broadcast. Talk to us, from your perspective, what does e-invoicing has been pioneered? It's been in the works for a while, but now all the small businesses, the smallest of businesses in the country, will be brought into the ambit of e-invoicing. It's compulsory for them from the 1st of August. And what's more, even small businesses without a GST registration can now buy and sell online, can transact online and get their e-invoicing done without a GST number.
Sir, earlier we used to hear that in the foreign countries, the concept is there that you just ask for the bill and it is routing through some government portal and it is seamless, it is, you see, evasionless. Now the concept has been introduced in India and it has been introduced in a graded manner, starting from the large taxpayers, then reducing to lower. And now it will be very good concept if it can be further made optional even for the smallest taxpayers or non-taxpayers. I think it's a good initiative. It's a win-win for all the consumers as well as the taxpayers, and it will bring the informal economy to the formal economy, and everybody, I think, will be benefited with this initiative.
Right, it's a wonderful initiative. Tell us in terms of, from your perspective, e-invoicing with the way it has gone from the year 2020 when it was about 500 crore rupees and now brought down to this level to 5 crore rupees. It's been quite the climb down.
No, it's not quite calendar. It was expected very much in the beginning itself, but since the system has to be robust and industry also needs, or taxpayers also need to develop their system to bring it at par with the requirements. So the government has gradually reduced it to 5 crore rupees. And the systematic reduction in the turnover is, I think, good for both.
Right, but my question is that does it in any way complicate things further for small businesses with limited resources?
No. It doesn't require any will source. It is a very simple. Everybody is now having, internet connections. It can be even fed up through mobile also. We can reach out from any place. India is, I think, fastest growing in the technology.
All right, fair enough. So my question is also, I was just asking Prashant this: all the companies, in India so far who have vendors of all shapes and sizes, of all of all ticket sizes, they will need to review their vendor agreements because of this change in e-invoicing guidelines.
No, why to renew their or change their vendor agreements? I don't feel so any such requirement is over there. It is very simple. Once you are giving manual invoices, paperless, now will be introduced. So it can be transported easily. Also, even scanned copy can be sent. Even the QR code will do. So even on the transit, it will be easy to verify whether it is a genuine tax invoice or not.
Right.
So I don't feel it is a burden. I don't feel it is a burden to the any business person.
All right, it's not a question of a burden. I'm just wondering how it is going to play out going forward. How does it change the playground, the playing field, so to speak, right now? I was going to ask Prashant, so many of us got GST numbers, wanted to begin their own businesses during the pandemic. We also have vendors, they also have vendors. Individuals who have GST numbers also have vendors that, they get supplies from, services from, and goods from, so how do they need to be careful going forward? Mr. Bisla, if you can hear me.
Yeah. So I don't feel there was any problem for getting GST registration even during pandemic. It was just a time-bound allocation of GST registration. Now government has launched a special drive for re-verification of those registration numbers where it was found to be misused in any manner. So anybody can start any business even right now and they will get instant GST number. You see the figures of increase of the taxpayers. It is tremendous. If we talk about last 6 years, it is, I think, doubled till date.
All right, fair enough, Mr. Bisla and Mr. Prashant Agarwal. Thank you so much for taking time out to join us and help us understand how important e-invoicing is going to be for businesses across India.